A thought can enter your mind without permission and change the atmosphere of an entire day. It may predict failure, revive an old humiliation, imagine something disturbing, or insist that the future is already ruined. The thought appears quickly, but what follows can last for hours. You question why it came, you try to force it out. You examine it from every angle until its presence begins to feel like proof that something is wrong with you. Soon, you are no longer dealing with one thought, you are dealing with fear of the thought itself. Most people believe peace will arrive when the mind finally stops producing anything dark, irrational, or unwanted. That standard creates a battle no human being can permanently win. You cannot prevent every impression from appearing, and you do not need to. The Stoics placed freedom somewhere more practical, between what enters the mind and what the mind agrees to believe. A thought can be present without becoming your identity. It can be loud without becoming a command. It can return without deserving another hour of your life. This episode will not promise you a permanently silent mind. It will show you how to remove the authority from thoughts that have been controlling your attention, choices, and emotional state. The goal is not to become someone who never thinks badly again. It is to become someone who can meet a difficult thought, see it clearly, and continue living without surrendering to it. The first mistake often happens before the thought has even finished forming. You treat its presence as evidence about who you are. A sudden image appears, and you wonder what kind of person could imagine it. Your mind predicts that you will fail, and the prediction begins to feel like a revelation about your ability. An old mistake returns, and within moments you are no longer remembering something you did. You are deciding what that memory proves about your entire character. The thought becomes a confession you never chose to make. Epictetus placed great importance on how we handle impressions. An impression is the mind's first presentation of something, a possibility, interpretation, memory, image, or judgment that arrives before careful examination. Its arrival is not the same as agreement. That distinction protects something essential. You do not select every sentence your mind produces. Memories surface because something reminded you of them. Fear generates possible outcomes. Imagination creates scenes you dislike. At times, the mind combines ideas in ways that feel strange, offensive, or completely opposed to your values. An unwanted thought may disturb you precisely because it conflicts with what you care about. Feeling alarmed by it does not make it a hidden desire. The thought occurred within you, but occurrence is not intention. Your character becomes visible in what you deliberately accept, encourage, and act upon. Consider the difference between these two statements. I am a failure, and my mind is predicting failure. The first turns a passing conclusion into an identity. The second describes what is happening without declaring the prediction true. The language may seem like a small detail, but it creates useful distance. The same applies to a painful memory. Instead of saying, I always ruin everything, recognize that your mind has returned to one event and is trying to make it represent the whole of your life. You can take responsibility for a real mistake without allowing the memory to define everything that came before, or everything still possible afterward. When a disturbing thought appears, name the event once and plainly. My mind produced a frightening image. I am having the thought that this will go badly. A memory has returned. Do not add a judgment about what the thought says about your worth. Do not begin searching your history for evidence that it reveals your real self. That investigation often gives a random mental event far more importance than it originally possessed. This is not a method for proving that every thought is false. Some thoughts point toward responsibilities, unresolved problems, or behavior that needs to change. Those thoughts can be examined honestly, but examination becomes clearer after you separate the message from your identity. You can ask whether a thought is accurate without asking whether its existence makes you defective. That is the first freedom. realizing that the mind can produce something you did not request, and you are still the one who decides what relationship to have with it. A thought has appeared. You have not yet agreed with it, acted upon it, or made it part of your character. Once you understand that, you no longer have to force it out merely to prove that it does not belong to you. Once you stop treating every thought as a confession, another habit becomes easier to see: the attempt to remove it by force. The thought appears, and you immediately demand that it leave. You argue against it, replace it with the opposite idea, or search for something reassuring enough to make it disappear. Then you check whether the strategy worked. Is it gone now? That question brings the thought back into view. You check again a few minutes later, and once more the mind must recreate the very thing you are trying not to think about. This is why the struggle can become more exhausting than the original thought. In order to guard against its return, part of your attention must remain assigned to watching for it. The mind becomes like someone standing at a doorway, waiting for an unwanted visitor who may or may not appear. Bedtime makes this pattern especially clear. A worry arrives when the room becomes quiet. You tell yourself that you must stop thinking because you need to sleep. Now sleep depends on winning an argument with your own mind. Every few minutes you measure how calm you feel, and each measurement confirms that you are still awake. The same thing happens during work, conversation, or rest. The thought itself may last a moment. The campaign against it can occupy the afternoon. Allowing a thought to remain for a while does not mean endorsing it. Acceptance describes your willingness to acknowledge what is already happening. Agreement is the decision to treat the thought as true, valuable, or worthy of action. They are not the same. You can notice anger without approving cruelty. You can experience fear without accepting its prediction. You can allow an unwanted image to exist without giving it moral significance. When the mind produces something distressing, try a quieter response. Notice it once. You might say inwardly, "That thought is here again." Avoid adding a demand for immediate relief. Let the discomfort be present for a few breaths without testing whether it is fading. Then place your attention on something neutral and specific. Feel the weight of your body against the chair. Notice 3 sounds in the room. Look carefully at the shape and color of an ordinary object. If you are engaged in a task, return to one visible part of that task, rather than trying to recover perfect concentration all at once. The thought may interrupt again. Its return does not mean the practice failed. A return of attention is available each time the thought returns. Be careful not to turn the sensory exercise into another ritual for making the thought vanish. If you believe you must name exactly 3 sounds before you are safe or calm, the exercise has become another negotiation with the thought. Use it only as a direction for attention, then continue with what you are doing. Real problems still deserve real responses. Acceptance does not require ignoring danger, neglecting responsibility, or pretending that evidence does not matter. It simply prevents mental resistance from becoming the automatic response to every uncomfortable idea. You are teaching the mind that a thought can be present without becoming the center of the room. It may fade quickly or remain in the background. Either way, you have already practiced something more important than mental silence, returning to your life while the mind is still making noise. Some thoughts do not merely appear. They make a claim. They tell you what another person thinks, what will happen next, or what one difficult moment proves about your future. Because the claim arrives in your own voice, it can pass through the mind without being questioned. You lose your place while speaking in a group, and the mind immediately concludes that everyone noticed, that they now see you as foolish, and that you should avoid speaking again. An awkward moment has been turned into a social verdict and a prediction. Epictetus taught his students to examine a harsh impression before granting it assent. The mind's first interpretation deserves inspection, not automatic trust. This is where Stoic discipline becomes more precise than simply thinking positively. You are not trying to replace every uncomfortable conclusion with a pleasant one. You are asking the thought to prove what it claims. Write the thought in the exact form in which it appeared. Everyone thinks I am incompetent. I will never recover from this. This person's silence means I have been rejected. Once the thought is visible, separate what happened from what the mind added. Perhaps the observable event is that you lost your place and stopped speaking for several seconds. The conclusion that everyone now sees you as incompetent is an interpretation. It may feel immediate and convincing, but the feeling does not supply evidence. Ask what genuinely supports the claim, then look for information it has ignored. Did anyone criticize you? Did the conversation continue normally? Have you spoken clearly in other situations? Are there explanations that do not require a permanent judgment about your ability? The goal is not to construct a defense lawyer for your ego. Evidence may reveal that something did go badly. You may have been unprepared, spoken carelessly, or misunderstood the situation. Honest examination must remain willing to find fault where fault exists. But even an accurate criticism should remain proportionate. I handled that conversation poorly does not become I am incapable of communicating. This person is disappointed with me does not prove everyone eventually leaves. A specific failure can require a specific correction without becoming a prophecy about your whole life. Now form a statement that is neutral enough to believe. I had an awkward moment, and I do not know what everyone thought. I made a mistake that I can examine and address. I do not yet have enough information to interpret this silence. A balanced thought may not create instant relief. That is not its purpose. Its purpose is to restore accuracy so that your next action is based on what is known rather than what fear invented. If evidence confirms a real problem, respond to the problem. Apologize, prepare differently, clarify what happened, or accept a consequence that belongs to your conduct. If the claim remains unsupported, do not keep treating uncertainty as proof of the worst possibility. This practice works because it creates a space between mental language and reality. The thought may speak with certainty, but certainty of tone is not certainty of fact. There is also a point at which examination must end. Once you have identified the evidence, formed a reasonable conclusion, and chosen any necessary action, repeating the same questions will not produce greater honesty. It may only reopen the case because you disliked the emotional result. A thought should be allowed to change your conduct when it reveals something true and useful. It should not be allowed to control your life simply because it knows how to sound convincing. A thought can be examined honestly and still return. You have already considered the evidence. You know what happened, what remains uncertain, and what action is available. Yet the mind begins the discussion again, promising that one more review will finally produce certainty. This is how rumination disguises itself as responsibility. It rarely feels like useless repetition while you are inside it. It feels as though you are trying to understand the past, prevent another mistake, or prepare for every possible outcome. The intention may be reasonable. The process is not always useful. You replay a conversation to discover where the other person's tone changed. Then you replay it to decide what you should have said. Later, you return to it to predict what they will say next time. No new information has appeared, but the mind continues working as if the correct amount of thought could alter an event that has already ended. Future worry follows the same pattern. You imagine a difficult outcome, create a response, then create another outcome that defeats the response. Each solution produces a new possibility to solve. Preparation has become a machine that manufactures more uncertainty. Useful reflection moves somewhere. It identifies a fact you missed, reaches a decision, changes a plan, or produces an action. Rumination returns to the same questions while increasing agitation and reducing your ability to do anything with the answers. When you notice the loop, ask one practical question: is there something I can do about this now? If the answer is yes, define the action in visible terms, send the necessary message, add the appointment to your calendar, prepare the document, ask for clarification. A thought that reveals a responsibility should be converted into conduct. If action is possible but cannot happen yet, decide when it will happen. Write down the task and the time you intend to address it. This gives the concern a place in reality instead of forcing the mind to hold it continuously. Some worries have no available action because they concern hypothetical events, another person's private judgment, or an outcome that has not arrived. Record the concern in one sentence and reserve a brief period later to review it. When it returns during the day, you do not need to solve it again. Remind yourself that it has already been recorded and that no new decision is currently required. During the scheduled review, examine each concern once. Separate problems that can be acted upon from possibilities that cannot be controlled. Make a plan where a plan is possible. When the period ends, close the page and return to the rest of your life. This is not avoidance. Avoidance refuses to look at a real issue. Containment gives the issue an appropriate amount of attention and prevents it from claiming every unoccupied moment. Urgent dangers and immediate responsibilities should not be delayed for a scheduled reflection period, nor should serious emotional pain be reduced to a productivity exercise. Some experiences require an honest conversation, sustained support, or professional care. The purpose is simply to recognize when thought has stopped serving action. You may still feel unsettled after reaching a decision. The mind often treats emotional discomfort as evidence that more analysis is needed, but a decision can be reasonable before it feels completely reassuring. Allow the discomfort to remain without reopening the entire investigation. The past will not change because you replay it perfectly. The future will not become certain because you rehearse every disaster. Once reflection has produced all the action available, continuing to think is no longer preparation. The concern has been recorded, the response has been chosen. What remains is to place your attention back inside the life that is happening now. Attention cannot remain nowhere. After you decide that a thought does not need another argument, the mind still requires a direction. Simply telling yourself to stop thinking leaves an empty instruction. You have rejected one destination without choosing another. That is why a thought can return even after you understand it. You are washing dishes, reading a page, or sitting with someone you care about, but your attention has not fully entered the activity. Part of you remains available for the old conversation, imagined disaster, or painful memory to resume. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly trained himself to return to the action immediately in front of him. He did not wait for the mind to become perfectly quiet before rejoining his responsibilities. The present task gave his attention somewhere useful to stand. This return begins with what is physically real. Notice the contact between your feet and the floor. Feel the object in your hand. Identify a few colors in the room, or listen for the nearest sound and then the farthest. You are not searching for a profound experience. You are orienting attention toward information that exists now, rather than a scene being reconstructed by thought. Then choose one bounded activity. Do not tell yourself to focus on life or be present. Those instructions are too broad. Decide what presence will look like for the next few minutes. Read until the end of the page and notice what the passage actually says. Wash the dishes without reaching for your phone. Listen to the person speaking and follow the meaning of their words. Complete one visible part of the work in front of you. A clear boundary gives attention a place to return. The unwanted thought may continue in the background. You do not need to stop the task and remove it before proceeding. Each time you notice that your attention has wandered, Bring it back to the same chosen activity. Return without commentary. Avoid saying, "I cannot focus," or "this thought is ruining everything." Those statements create a new problem around an ordinary lapse of attention. You notice that the mind wandered. That recognition is already the beginning of returning. You may repeat this many times. Repetition does not make the exercise ineffective. It is the exercise. Be careful, however, not to use present moment attention to escape something that requires a response. If you need to make a decision, address harm, or prepare for a genuine responsibility, grounding yourself should help you act more clearly. It should not become a way to remain comfortably inactive. Once the necessary action has been identified, place your attention on performing it rather than continuing to think about performing it. There will also be moments when the best present task is rest. You might sit quietly, walk without stimulation, or allow the body to settle after a difficult day. Rest can receive deliberate attention just as work can. The essential difference is whether you are actually resting or mentally repeating the same distress while your body remains still. A difficult thought may stay with you for part of the activity. Let the measure of success be observable. Did you hear the person in front of you? Did you finish the page? Did you complete the next responsible action? You are not proving that the thought has disappeared. You are proving that attention can be reclaimed before it does. The mind often makes one final bargain. I will act when I feel certain. You will begin the work when the fear of failure is gone. You will enter the conversation when you know exactly how the other person will respond. You will accept the invitation when you feel confident that nothing awkward will happen. The condition sounds reasonable, but certainty rarely arrives on command. While you wait, the thought begins governing your behavior. It does not need to convince you completely. It only needs to make action uncomfortable enough that you postpone it. You may understand that the prediction is exaggerated and still cancel the plan. You may know that one mistake does not define your ability and still refuse to try again. The thought has lost the argument, yet it continues making the decisions. Epictetus connected the disciplined use of impressions with appropriate action. What matters is not only whether you judge a thought accurately, but whether you continue performing the responsibilities that belong to your character and your place in life. Ask a different question when uncertainty blocks you. Instead of asking whether you feel ready, ask what a reasonable person in your position should do next. If you made a mistake, the appropriate action may be an apology. If an important task feels intimidating, it may be opening the document and producing one imperfect paragraph. If fear is making you withdraw from people you value, the next action might be replying honestly rather than waiting to feel socially invulnerable. Keep the step concrete and proportionate. You do not need to prove courage through a dramatic leap. Large gestures can become another attempt to defeat the thought and guarantee that it never returns. Choose the smallest action that genuinely belongs to the life you want to keep living. Then allow the thought to come with you. Your mind may continue predicting embarrassment while you speak. Doubt may remain while you submit the work. A painful memory may still be present while you behave differently from the person you were when it happened. Action does not require mental agreement from every part of you. This practice changes the evidence available to the mind. Before acting, fear can claim that you are incapable of moving while uncertainty exists. Once you take the step, that claim becomes harder to maintain. The outcome may still be imperfect, but you have discovered that discomfort and responsible action can occupy the same moment. Do not confuse this with recklessness. Some hesitation contains useful information. Check whether the action is safe, ethical, and consistent with your real responsibilities. Courage does not require entering danger, trusting someone who has repeatedly harmed you, or ignoring professional advice. There is also an important limit when thoughts are severe, obsessive, or connected to compulsive behavior. Deliberately confronting intense triggers can be part of clinical treatment, but it should not be improvised as a test of Stoic strength. Qualified guidance matters, especially when the thoughts involve harm, trauma, or a fear of losing control. For ordinary avoidance, however, the pattern can be interrupted in a simple way. Identify one action you have been postponing because you wanted a different internal state. Reduce it to a responsible beginning, and perform that beginning before the mind feels fully settled. You may feel relief afterward, or you may not. Relief is not the only evidence that the action mattered. Every time you act according to judgment, rather than mental noise, you weaken the rule that says peace must come before participation. Confidence begins to grow from something more reliable than a reassuring thought, the memory of continuing while certainty was still absent. Acting through uncertainty changes what happens in a difficult moment. Yet the mind is also shaped during quieter hours by the ideas it repeatedly rehearses. A single unwanted thought may arrive without permission. A familiar pattern often survives because you return to it again and again. You replay resentment until the offense becomes the central meaning of a relationship. You revisit comparison until another person's success automatically feels like evidence of your failure. You rehearse catastrophe whenever the future is uncertain, then wonder why uncertainty immediately produces fear. Repetition gives these thoughts familiarity, and familiarity can be mistaken for truth. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the character of the mind is influenced by its habitual thoughts. He was not telling himself to fill every hour with pleasant ideas. His private reflections were often corrections, principles he wanted readily available when irritation, fear, pride, or discouragement returned. That is a different practice from waiting for a negative thought and trying to defeat it. Choose one situation that repeatedly pulls your mind into the same pattern. Perhaps criticism becomes self-condemnation, a delayed response becomes rejection, an inconvenience becomes proof that the whole day is ruined. Then prepare one balanced principle for that specific trigger. If you become preoccupied with other people's opinions, the principle might be, their judgment may matter, but my conduct remains my responsibility. If uncertainty produces catastrophe, remind yourself, I can prepare for what is likely without pretending I know what will happen. If one mistake becomes an attack on your identity, use something more precise. This action deserves correction, not a permanent verdict. The sentence should be credible enough to survive contact with reality. Avoid declarations such as, nothing can hurt me, everything will work out, or I have no fear. These statements may sound powerful, but the mind can immediately find evidence against them. A useful principle does not deny pain, risk, or human limitation. It identifies the part of the situation where choice remains possible. Rehearse it briefly before the predictable trigger arrives. Read it before entering the meeting where you tend to become defensive. Recall it before checking the message you have been anxiously waiting for. Bring it to mind when beginning work that usually awakens self-doubt. The purpose is not to control exactly what you will think. It is to make a wiser response easier to remember under pressure. When the old thought returns, you now have more than one mental route available. You can recognize the familiar conclusion and place the prepared principle beside it. Then let your conduct decide which one receives authority. This practice also requires patience. A thought repeated for years will not disappear because you wrote one better sentence. The shift becomes visible gradually. You notice the pattern sooner. You spend less time inside it. Your response becomes more measured, and recovery no longer requires the entire day. Do not turn the exercise into constant thought policing. You are not required to replace every unpleasant idea with a Stoic statement. That would make the mind another environment in which you are afraid to make a mistake. Train only what you deliberately return to. The mind will still produce noise, contradiction, and old material. What begins to change is its familiar center. Through repeated reflection and conduct, you give it principles worth finding again when pressure makes everything else difficult to remember. There is a point at which discipline means ending the attempt to handle everything alone. Unwanted thoughts are part of ordinary mental life. They can be strange, disturbing, or completely inconsistent with your values. Their presence alone does not establish a disorder, and it does not automatically reveal an intention to act. The pattern deserves greater attention when the thoughts become persistent, highly distressing, or difficult to disengage from. You may find that they interrupt sleep, prevent you from working, damage relationships, or consume large parts of the day. Sometimes the clearest sign appears in what you feel compelled to do afterward. You repeatedly check that a door is locked, ask another person for reassurance, avoid ordinary situations, or perform a mental ritual to neutralize the thought. The behavior brings temporary relief, but uncertainty soon returns and demands that the process be repeated. At that point, more self-discipline may not be the missing answer. Trying harder to reason with every thought can become another ritual. Repeating Stoic principles until you feel completely safe can serve the same function as repeated checking. Even a useful practice can become part of the cycle when you believe it must remove all anxiety before you are allowed to continue. This is why philosophy needs a responsible boundary. Stoic practices can help you observe impressions, question judgments, and act according to your values. They are not a replacement for mental health treatment when symptoms are persistent or significantly affecting your life. Qualified support can help distinguish ordinary negative thinking, anxiety, rumination, intrusive thoughts, and obsessive patterns. Treatment may involve structured talking therapy, and some conditions may also benefit from medication prescribed and monitored by a clinician. Seeking that help is not an admission that your mind has defeated you. It is a practical response to the evidence in front of you. Be especially careful with thoughts involving harm. An unwanted image or thought that frightens and repulses you is different from wanting to carry it out. Many people experience distressing, intrusive material without any intention of acting upon it. Shame can make them afraid to explain what is happening, even to someone qualified to help. But if thoughts of harming yourself or another person involve desire, intent, planning, preparation, or a genuine fear that you may act, treat the situation as urgent. Put distance between yourself and anything that could be used to cause harm. Do not remain isolated. Contact emergency support, a qualified professional, or a trusted person who can stay with you and help you reach immediate care. Do not use stoicism to minimize danger or accuse yourself of weakness. The distinction between what is and is not within your control was never meant to make you responsible for every symptom that appears in your mind. Your responsibility begins with how honestly you assess the situation and whether you use the support available. For some thoughts, a pause and a clearer judgment will be enough. Others require sustained practice. Some need professional treatment. Wisdom lies in recognizing which situation you are actually facing. You do not prove strength by enduring every mental struggle privately. You show it by responding in the way reality requires, even when that response includes asking someone else to help you carry what has become too heavy to manage alone. You may not be able to prevent every dark, irrational, or unwanted thought from entering your mind, but you can stop treating its arrival as a verdict. You can let a thought exist without defending against it, believing it, repeating it, or arranging your life around it. When it contains something true, you can respond with honesty. When it offers only fear and mental noise, you can return your attention to what is real and continue acting according to your values. That is a more durable form of peace than a permanently silent mind. The thought may return tomorrow. Its return does not erase the clarity you practiced today. You are still able to notice it, choose your relationship with it, and decide whether the moment calls for examination, action, release, or support. Progress is not measured by never thinking badly again. It appears when an old thought occupies less of your day, changes fewer of your decisions, and no longer determines who you believe yourself to be. Your mind will not always feel orderly. You can still meet it with patience, accuracy, and courage. And when the burden becomes too heavy to manage alone, reaching for qualified help is part of that courage, not a departure from it. The goal was never to empty your mind. It was to stop abandoning your life whenever the mind became difficult. There is another video on the screen now to help you continue building this kind of inner steadiness. Thank you for being part of Stoic Saga. Stay clear, stay responsible, and keep choosing the life in front of you.